Welcome back to Tangled Twists, where today we're making emergency stim boxes. So what do I mean when I say emergency stim kit? Stimming is something that people who are neurodivergent use to help regulate their reactions to environmental stressors. So, for instance, I have anxiety. I get anxiety really bad. I am prone to anxiety attacks. One of the things that I really, really hate is flying. Being up in the air, not my favorite thing. And that's how I actually learned that sewing shuts off my brain. I had a hand project that I took with me, and I was sewing on it for basically the whole flight. And when I got off the plane, I realized that flying didn't bother me that day. And so I've since decided that because I don't always have something on hand, I should. And so I decided I was going to make these little boxes. It's got everything I need in it to do a very, very simple project. That's something else that I learned, is that this can't be complicated. If I'm starting to get into a panic state, I need something that I don't need to think about. I don't need to think about where the seams are going to go. I don't need to think about what piece goes where. So inside this box is everything I need to make a handkerchief. As a handkerchief is square. It's very simple. It's only got a couple seams. They're small. I can use a lot of offcuts from my other projects for this, which is fantastic. And everything I need to do that is in here. I've got a magnet that holds my needle. There are scissors, there's a needle threader, there's thread, there's a thimble, and there's the fabric itself. And this is what we are going to do today.
What goes into your stim kit? Well, first you're going to need a box. It took me a while to find a box that I liked that I thought would be big enough. I found these on Amazon. It came in a 6-pack, I think. So that was more than enough for me to use. And then we need things to fill that box with. One of the things that you're going to need is a thread bobbin. A full spool won't fit, so it's important to have something that you can clip your thread into so you can carry your thread with you. You will also need some thread. I'm using Gutermann cotton. I prefer to use cotton thread whenever possible. And you can see how big this is. It's obviously not going to fit per thing. So that's why I'm using the bobbin thread combination. I've put in a needle threader for this. I don't usually use them, but if I'm stressed, I don't want to have to think about threading a needle. They do have a little cutter on the back. I don't like to use that because it can fray the thread and make it harder to thread the needle, but it is available as an option. These came in a little kit that had different styles. I picked the one that would actually fit in the needles that I was using. These will be just extras for me later. I also have my needles. These are size 10 quilting longs. I love them, but they do have very, very small needle eyes. That's why I needed to use the threader that I have on hand. The other ones just won't fit, but these are my favorite needles, so of course they're going in. And finally, you'll need some scissors. I got these on Amazon. They're a little stiff when you first start using them, but I really like them. They're very sturdy. They're very compact. I have taken these on an airplane and never had any trouble with it because they are so very small. If you are using the type of needle threader that has a cutter on it though, and these get taken away from you, you do have a backup, so that's kind of handy. Otherwise, you've got a nice little set of scissors that you can use. With our materials assembled, it's time to get our fabric ready. You want to use a natural fiber for this. Polyester handkerchiefs are kind of gross. They don't absorb very well. They don't breathe very well. Use a natural fiber like linen or cotton. You can also use rayon or viscose. If you're using linen, I like to use thread pulling to mark my fabric for cutting. It's a little bit tedious. It can take a while. The threads like to break, but it's the best way to ensure that you have a really nice straight edge. And I personally struggle with rotary cutters. If those work better for you and you can get a nice straight edge, great, go for it. I'm planning on these handkerchiefs having a finished size of a 12-inch square. So I'm cutting here to make sure that I have at least 13 inches square for each handkerchief. That means leaving a little bit of excess on the edges. I will need to cut off the selvage so that everything stays clean, but I can get a lot of handkerchiefs out of this fabric. It's 60 inches wide, and I've just cut a section off of that I will then break down into the smaller pieces to use for the handkerchiefs themselves. You can also use leftover fabric from other projects as long as you have a space that's big enough for the size that you want. I have made smaller handkerchiefs. They're a little bit more like tissues and they're harder to keep track of. They get gross a lot faster. So that's kind of personal preference. You can really do any size that you want for that. I like to cut a big section off and then pull more threads and cut everything in one go. I'm very much an assembly line person. I find it goes really quickly that way. So I'm just hauling through and cutting all 4 of my hankies in one big piece. And then I'm going to pull threads again. This time I'm doing it to mark where the seam allowance is on these handkerchiefs. When I'm in an anxious state, I'm not great at thinking. So my goal here is to pre-mark where all of the seam allowance is. That way I can just fold along the line and go. So I'm measuring out 1/2 inch on each side, pulling the little thread out, and that's going to leave a nice rim all the way around the handkerchief. You do want to do this on all sides. It takes a little bit longer to do setup, but it is so worth it when you're actually trying to put things together. Not having to think about your seams is very, very useful. When you go to prepare your thread bobbins, you're going to need to keep in mind that you probably want to put more thread on these than you think you want. It takes a surprising amount of thread to do a tiny hem like this, and on these I did not wind enough. So make sure that you're putting a lot of thread on there. You can leave some space so that you can fit some other thread colors on there. That way, if you have multiple colors of handkerchief, you don't really have to worry about having enough. And then you just secure the thread and trim, and you have a little bobbin good to go. It is time to start putting these boxes together, and that means it's time to cut my magnet piece. This is actually a really old piece of magnet. It was designed for putting on the back of photos so you could hang them on your fridge back in the 90s. I'm cutting a strip off of it to size. It is just magnetic enough to hold my needles, and this way they don't go wandering around in my box and maybe stab me or get lost. I'm following my assembly line process and cutting all of the strips that I need for that. It's really easy with magnets. They stack on top of each other really well. Then I need to take 1 per box and peel the backing off of it. It can be a little bit fiddly with these sometimes, so just be patient. It takes a little bit to get the backing off. It's nice and sticky on the other side though, and will fit neatly into my box, and I just stick it right there on the side and it's ready to hold my needle. It's time to get our boxes loaded up. I have a pre-threaded needle stuck to my magnet so I don't have to worry about threading a needle when I'm stressed. I'm putting a thread bobbin and scissors in the bottom because the handkerchief is really bulky and these fit best if you put them in lower down. Then you're going to need to fiddle around with your hanky to get it to fit. You may need to fold it a couple times. I suggest not pressing the seams because they're going to become unpressed with all of the pressure and squashing that you're going to need to do. I tuck my needle threader in. There's space to add a thimble if you sew with a thimble. I do, I just didn't have one on me this day. And you can close it all up, and there's your stim box.
Now that we've got our stim kits made, there's one more thing that you need to keep in mind, and that is refills. If these are going to be effective, they need to always be ready for you, and that means that whenever you have a chance, maybe you don't know what else to do, go check your stash and see if there's any fabric that you can make into your little squares, and just keep a pile of these around. That way, anytime you take one out of your kit, you can always put a new one in later, and you always have something to grab. I hope that this helps you as much as it has helped me. If sewing isn't your jam and doesn't calm your brain down, think of ways that you can carry something with you that might help in those tense situations. And for those of you making stim kits, good luck, and I'll see you next time.